we're going to talk about efficiency. In order to do that, we need to talk about a thing called consumer surplus and producer surplus. So consumer surplus is the amount that an individual would have been willing to pay minus the price that they actually pay. I want you to think about this as like kind of like a savings in the back of your head. So you're standing in line and you're going to pay for a $7 coffee, right? So that's what you're in your mind to pay $7. You get up there and they actually tell you, hey, it's actually $5 today. And so you're saving $2, right? This is your consumer surplus. You were willing to pay 7, but you only have to pay 5. So that's how consumer surplus works. On a graph, it's just going to be the area above the market price and below the demand curve. I'll show you what we mean in a second here. Another example, you're willing to pay $20, $25 for a shirt. You find out the price is 15, so savings of $10. So you have $10 in consumer surplus. Now this happens the whole way until you get to equilibrium. So let me show you what we talk about there. So here is your demand curve, and you were willing to buy the one t-shirt for 25, but because of the market price at 15, you have this much in terms of your surplus, right? It is the area above the market price and below the demand curve, right? So it's this entire area here. This is your total amount of consumer surplus. And I can show you, because if you were to buy another t-shirt, right, maybe you're trying to look at $20 per t-shirt. So now, on that second t-shirt, your consumer surplus is 5. You're willing to pay 20, you only have to pay 15. And so again, this entire area here below the demand curve and above the price, this is what we call your consumer surplus. Okay? Now, producer surplus is the same idea, but it's looking at the willingness to sell. So it is the price the producer is actually receiving minus the price the producer would actually be willing to accept. So going back to the coffee example, right? A firm is willing to sell a coffee for $3. The market price is at 5. So if they're willing to sell for 3, but they can actually sell at 5, they gain an extra $2. This is $2 worth of producer surplus. Now this area for the producer surplus is the difference between the price and the supply curve. Let me show you what I'm talking about there. So, supply and demand. The market price is at $5, but here, for that one cup of coffee, they're willing to sell it for 3. So, basically, they sell it at 5, they were willing to sell it at 3, so this area here, this $2 difference, is their producer surplus. Okay? If they were to sell another cup, and they said, okay, for 2 cups, we'll sell it for 5 apiece, right? Right there is at the market price, so they have 0 producer surplus there. So this entire area here, below the market price, and above the supply curve, this entire area is your producer surplus. So together, if I were to draw it on a graph, this area here is your consumer surplus. This area down here is your producer surplus. Now surplus is maximized at the equilibrium, right here. There is no inefficiency here. This is why the market works towards equilibrium. This is the best for both consumers and producers at the equilibrium. We are maximizing surplus here. So max surplus at equilibrium. That's what we want. Okay? Now there are certain things that will create inefficiencies. So when we talk about inefficiencies, we're talking about dead weight loss, the loss in social surplus that occurs when a market produces an inefficient quantity. I want you to think about this as money just thrown away and it benefits nobody. It does not go to savings for the consumer. It does not go to extra profits for producers. Okay, Consumers are missing out on benefiting from a lower price. Producers are losing potential profits by not selling at the equilibrium. So this money goes to nobody. It is just lost value. So deadweight loss is something that does happen whenever we have price controls. Okay. So whenever we looked at shortages and surpluses and we're not at the equilibrium, we're causing inefficiencies. This is what that looks like. Okay. So here we have our supply and demand curves, and then here's our equilibrium. Now if we put a price ceiling, remember a binding price ceiling puts you down here. Okay. So this is your price ceiling. So this means you have a shortage. You have this much that you are selling. This is your quantity supplied. Now, this area still is your producer surplus because it's below the price and above the supply curve. But we're not at equilibrium here. We are at this quantity. So the consumers can only buy this amount of apartments. All right? So going back to consumer surplus, which was everything below demand and above price, this area here is your consumer surplus. If you're wondering why are we not over here, it's because we only have this many apartments available. So what are we missing? We are missing out on this area here. Going back to what we talked about with maximum surplus, where we have this entire triangle filled up, we are missing the front part there. This is your dead weight loss. So this is what dead weight loss looks like with price ceilings. Price floors have a very similar effect, but now the price floor has to be here. Price floor above there is a binding price floor. Now, this right here is the quantity that is being demanded. This right here is your quantity supply. Remember, we are not selling this amount because consumers are only buying this amount. Right? So since we're only buying that amount, this right here, below demand and above price, this is your consumer surplus. And because we're only selling this amount, and this is the supply curve, this is your producer surplus. So guess what? We are missing that front triangle out front. So this area here that we're not selling at the equilibrium, we're losing money, this is your dead weight loss. So this is that shortage that we talked about, or that surplus we talked about. So this creates inefficiencies in the market. And this is what it looks like on a graph. Okay? Taxes also have a similar effect when it comes to deadweight loss. So tax incidence is just how much a tax affects consumers and how much it affects producers. So imagine you go to a store and you see that a t-shirt, the tag says $20 on it, but do you actually pay $20? No, you pay $20 plus tax, right? So in this example, how much does the producer actually receive? Let's say the tax is $5. Now the producer is going to collect $25 from you, right? Pay the $5 tax. That's how sales tax works. Businesses collect sales tax from you and then pays it to the government for you. Okay, so then tax is $5. So what the producer gets is what's left over, which is just that $20. Okay, let me show you on the graph how that looks like. So before a tax, the market said we'll do $22 for a t-shirt. Okay, that was your equilibrium, and we're selling 50 shirts. Okay, we have our demand for shirts and our supply. Now, because we put a tax on businesses, a sales tax. This is going to change the supply curve to where now we have a supply plus a tax. Okay? So that's going to create this new equilibrium price up here. Let's call this $25. This is what you pay as a consumer. Okay? This right here on the supply curve, right? At this quantity, let's call it 40. So they're now selling 40 t-shirts, and on the supply curve, we're going to show here that $20 that says it on the tag. Right? So what we have here is the consumer price, let's call it PC, is now 25. The tax is 5. So that means the producer price is now 20. All right? So looking here, going back to efficiency and surplus, the area below the demand curve and above price, this is your consumer surplus, right? Now what about producer surplus? It's everything above the supply curve and below price. Remember, they are getting $20 after paying the tax. Okay? So this difference right here between 25 and 20, that is your tax. So this area right here is your tax revenue. This is what goes to the government. Okay? This is your tax revenue. Notice again, we're not having that full triangle filled out. We're having this area that we're missing. So this is your dead weight loss. Okay? So taxes do cause inefficiencies in a market because you are not selling at your equilibrium anymore. The government is affecting the market, causing inefficiencies. More specifically, you as a consumer, you used to pay $22. You are now paying $25. So you have a consumer burden of how much? Not $5. How much are you burdened by this? You used to pay $22, you now pay $25. Your consumer burden is $3. The producer burden, right? They used to get $22, but now they're only getting 20. They used to get 22, now they're getting 20, so their producer burden is 2. And if you added this together, there is your tax. So this is how tax incidence works and how we have consumer burden and producer burden. Both are losing whenever we impose a tax. Okay? And this does create dead weight loss. All right? So that finishes up chapter 3. In chapter 4, we'll talk about labor markets and the financial capital market. I'll see you there.